So in this video, we are going to talk about the factors that control the erythrocyte production. Okay, so basically erythrocytes are your red blood cells, and we've been talking about the erythrocytes since the last few lectures. You can watch the previous lecture as well before watching this lecture because I've given the link in the description. It's important to watch that since the lectures connect. Okay, anyways, the red blood cell production, these erythrocyte production is controlled by the hormone called the erythropoietin. Erythropoietin is a special hormone, a glycoprotein of MR of approximately 34,000, which is mostly secreted by the kidneys. 90% of erythropoietin is secreted by the kidneys in response to low oxygen being supplied to the blood tissues. If the blood tissues are become hypoxic, that is, if the oxygen tension in the tissues decreases, then the erythropoietin concentration from the kidneys increase. And we are going to talk about that in a bit. Okay, so basically, this erythropoietin is responsible to increase the rate of red blood cells. Then the principal stimulus I told you just now that it's the low oxygen concentration or the low tissue oxygenation or hypoxia. That hypoxia is also a decrease in oxygen concentration in the tissues that mainly releases erythropoietin from the kidneys and other parts of the body, but kidneys are the main producers of erythropoietin. Okay, now there I've listed down a few conditions that could result in hypoxia and hence could result in increase in red blood cell production. Okay, when a person becomes anemic, if anemia occurs, okay, if anemia occurs, so what happens? Anemia is actually the decrease in the hemoglobin concentration in the blood, can be due to decrease in the number of red blood cells, or can be due to a decrease in hemoglobin per each red blood cell. But anyways, either ways, if it occurs anemia, or if it occurs, okay, the decrease in blood can be due to hemorrhage. Hemorrhage is when the blood vessels get ruptured and blood is lost. So what happens that the bone marrows are stimulated to produce red blood cells, and how are they stimulated? They are stimulated by the erythropoietin, which is secreted by the kidneys. Okay, the first condition in which hypoxia can occur, if the blood decreases due to hemorrhage, then bone marrow would produce more red blood cells, and erythropoietin is the hormone that stimulates the bone marrow to secrete red blood cells. Okay, the second condition in which hypoxia may occur is when parts of the bone marrow are damaged. Okay, specifically due to the X-ray therapy, because X-rays are ionizing radiations, they might damage some of your bone marrow, the red bone marrow that is responsible for the production of red blood cells. So what happens? This bone marrow, which has been damaged or which has been depleted, the remaining bone marrow which is left after the damage, it would undergo hyperplasia. Hyperplasia is when the number of bone marrow cells would increase so as to supply the RBC. RBCs, which are the increased demand to fulfill the increased demand of RBCs after the damage to the bone marrow. Okay, so this is the second condition in which hypoxia may occur if the bone marrow is damaged due to certain chemicals or certain X-rays. X-ray therapy or chemotherapy might also cause the bone marrow to damage. Okay, then the third case in which hypoxia may occur is that in certain diseases, the tissue blood flow, particularly due to also decreases, particularly during the cardiac failure and many lung diseases. Okay, so during cardiac failure, the blood is a heart is unable to pump enough blood to the tissues, and hence again hypoxia may occur. And so if hypoxia occurs, then the hematocrit level, hematocrit, as I told you in the previous lectures, that it is the volume or the percentage volume of red blood cells in the blood, it would increase due to increased erythropoietin stimulation. Okay, if hypoxia occurs, then erythropoietin would be secreted by the kidneys, and so erythropoietin would cause the red blood cell production to increase in the bone marrow, and so as a result the hematocrit level and the total blood volume will also increase. Okay, so these are the three major conditions in which hypoxia can occur. Well, some of the conditions, there can be many more. These are the conditions that I've listed down in which hypoxia can occur and can result in an increased RBC production. Okay, now let's look at the site at which this important hormone erythropoietin is secreted. 90% of its secretion is done by the kidneys. So kidneys have a very critical role in tissue oxygenation because they control the production of erythropoietin. So there are fibroblast-like interstitial cells in the cortex. these cells, the cortex cells, they require a lot of oxygen, okay, because there are many active processes going on. For example, the tubular secretion is an active process, or active transport of many other substances, so they require a lot of oxygen to produce ATP, and so as to help them in their function. So if the oxygen concentration decreases at the cortex, what happens is that the fibroblast like cells of the cortex, they secrete erythropoietin, and so that erythropoietin causes the red blood cell concentration to increase, and it causes the bone marrow cells to produce more red blood cells. And so if more red blood cells are produced, then these red blood cells would deliver this oxygen to these cortex cells, fibroblast like cells of the cortex. Just a moment. The fibroblast like cells of the cortex, and hence they'll help relieve the tissue hypoxia. And so the renal hypoxia, I should rather say, would be relieved. Okay, and if erythropoietin system is not functional, if erythropoietin is not being secreted by the fibroblast like cells of the interstitium of the cortex, then what happens, even if hypoxia occurs, red blood cell production will not increase, because it's the erythropoietin that causes the bone marrow, the stem cells of the bone marrow, of the red bone marrow, to secrete more red blood cells. Okay, now let's look at the mechanism by which the erythropoietin is secreted or is formed. Okay, how is it formed? Renal hypoxia, basically the hypoxia of the kidneys, decrease in oxygen concentration in the kidneys would increase the tissue concentration of a transcription factor, hypoxia inducible factor 1. This is a transcription factor for the gene activation of erythropoietin. I'm just going to tell you what I mean. Okay, which is a transcription factor for most of the hypoxia inducible genes, including the erythropoietin gene. Okay, well, this sentence actually means that if kidneys are lack of oxygen, kidneys face lack of oxygen, and the oxygen tension in the kidneys decrease, hypoxia inducible factor 1 is increased. Okay, this is secreted. Okay, and the tissue concentration of this in transcription factor would increase. This transcription factor, since it's a transcription factor, what it does is that it goes and binds to the erythropoietin gene. And since it's a transcription factor, and we know that erythropoietin is a glycoprotein, so it must have a gene to code for it. So once the transcription factor binds to the gene, then what happens is that okay, and in this erythropoietin gene, we have a specific part called the hypoxia response element. The hypoxia response element is present inside the erythropoietin gene, a specific sequence where this HIF1, the hypoxia inducible factor 1, binds. Okay, what this binding does is that after the binding of hypoxia inducible 1 factor 1 to the hypoxia response element, mRNA production starts. Okay, mRNA is synthesized, mRNA that encodes for the erythropoietin, and then this mRNA is translated into active erythropoietin secretion. So this is the mechanism by which erythropoietin is actually made. This is nothing new. This is just the old protein synthesis. Okay, since erythropoietin is a protein, so we'll have a transcription factor. That transcription factor has a special name, hypoxia inducible factor 1, and then this hypoxia inducible factor 1 will go and bind to a special region inside the erythropoietin gene called the hypoxia response element. And after its binding, what happens is that this gene gets activated, and an erythropoietin mRNA is produced, and then this mRNA leads to a synthesis of erythropoietin. So again, pretty much the same old story of protein synthesis. Now moving forward, okay, we just talked about renal hypoxia. Non-renal hypoxia can also stimulate the kidneys erythropoietin secretion. It can also cause the kidneys erythropoietin secretion. So what this suggests is that there must be some non-renal hypoxia sensors as well in the body that sends the signals to the kidney to secrete more erythropoietin. Okay, so we have hypoxia receptors, or I should rather say hypoxia sensors in the body elsewhere other than the kidney as well, that could detect the decreased oxygen concentration and hence could signal the kidney to produce more erythropoietin. Okay, the signaling mechanisms, the signaling molecules which are usually used for this purpose are the epinephrine, norepinephrine, and several prostaglandins. Okay, epinephrine, norepinephrine, and several prostaglandins. These are the molecules which are used to signal the kidney to secrete erythropoietin. And after the stimulation, the erythropoietin causes the stem cells of the bone marrow to produce more red blood cells. Okay, and if the kidneys are removed, what would happen? The 90% of erythropoietin available due to the which was produced by the kidney, it will not be available. And if this erythropoietin is not available, the person will become very anemic. The red blood cell concentration will not become high enough, and so due to lack of erythropoietin, the person might become highly anemic and death might occur. Okay, so this is okay. Let's move forward now. Okay, I've drawn it in diagrammatic form over here, how this entire thing works, everything that we've discussed so far. I'll just read the lines first. Erythropoietin stimulates the production of proerythroblast from the hematopoietic stem cells. Okay, we have hematopoietic stem cells over here in the bone marrow. Hematopoietic basically means the pluripotential hematopoietic stem cells, basically the stem cells which are capable of producing all the different types of red blood cells in the body. Okay, the generalized stem cells. What happens? I'll start out from here, from the lower part. If the tissue oxygenation decreases, if hypoxia occurs due to several, it can happen due to several factors. For example, low blood volume is being transported to the tissues, or anemia, or low hemoglobin concentration. So again, anemia and low hemoglobin would provide less oxygen. Poor blood flow due to some hindrances, and pulmonary diseases, some lung diseases. All these factors might decrease the efficiency of oxygen transport to the tissues. And so if the oxygen transport to the tissues decreases, then hypoxia in the tissues occurs. And due to this hypoxia, what happens? Renal and non-renal sensors in the body detect this hypoxia of the tissue, and they'll signal the kidneys to secrete more and more erythropoietin. And we've just discussed the mechanism by which erythropoietin is secreted. First, the transcription factor concentration increases. The HIF1, the hypoxia-inducible hypoxia-inducible factor 1. This hypoxia-inducible factor 1, it binds to the hypoxia response element in the erythropoietin gene, and then this produces mRNA, and that mRNA is then translated in the erythropoietin. Okay, and this takes approximately 24 hours. The erythropoietin concentration to reach maximum, it takes 24 hours for the erythropoietin concentration to reach its maximum value. And once the erythropoietin concentration reaches its maximum value, then this erythropoietin would go and it will stimulate these hematopoietic stem cells, and it will make the hematopoietic stem cells to differentiate and to reproduce and to grow faster than their normal rate, and they'll cause them to mature into proerythroblasts at a faster rate. And then these proerythroblasts will differentiate into red blood cells. We've covered the entire differentiation process, the maturation of red blood cells in the previous lectures. I've given the link in the description. Do check that out. And then these red blood cells would carry more and more oxygen to the tissues unless the hypoxia is relieved. Okay, so increases erythropoietin, it increases the rate at which the red blood cells mature. Okay, this process, the proerythroblast to red blood cell maturation process, this rate also increases with the presence of erythropoietin. Approximately 5 days are needed for new red blood cells to appear in the blood. So even after the erythropoietin concentration increases in the blood, after approximately 24 hours, we'll still need 5 days for this red blood cell concentration to increase. And so after that, once the red blood cells concentration increase in the blood, then hopefully the hypoxia will get relieved. And if our erythropoietin is not there, as we've talked about earlier, for example, in case of some renal diseases, or in case of kidney failure, or the kidney has been removed, what happens is that major erythropoietin, which is secreted by the kidneys, the 90%, will not be available, and the remaining 10%, which is mainly produced by the liver and other parts of the body, that's not sufficient for the increased red blood cell production. So the rate of red blood cell production is gonna become much slower. Okay, so we'll need more and more erythropoietin for red blood cell red blood cell maturation and the growth of the hematopoietic stem cells and their maturation into the red blood cells as well. So this was all about it for this lecture, I guess. In the next lecture, yeah, we covered the factors that control the erythrocyte production in this lecture. And then in the next lecture, okay, let me check what do we have for the next lecture. Okay, we need factors needed for RBC maturation. Okay, we are going to do the factors which are needed for red blood cell maturation in the next lecture. And so I've given a link to the next lecture in this in the description. Do check that out, please.